The email landed at 7:02 a.m. Subject, urgent meeting. My stomach dropped. I'd been at Crestview Financial for 22 years. 22 years building a career, a life. Now, my boss, Richard, sat across his polished mahogany desk, his face a mask of corporate regret. "David," he started, "we have to discuss your social media activity." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My personal Facebook page, a simple political opinion shared among friends. "We're terminating your employment, effective immediately." Just like that, 2 decades vanished, gone, all because of a single click on a Saturday afternoon. My clients, my reputation, my entire future, erased by a man who wouldn't even look me in the eye. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. At 54, you learn some battles aren't won with words. I simply stood, my knees protesting the sudden movement. I'm not some kid fresh out of college, I'm David Miller. I've managed portfolios bigger than Richard's mortgage. For 22 years, I was the guy they sent to calm, panicked clients during market crashes, the steady hand. My wife Sarah and I had just picked out the spot in the Blue Ridge Mountains for our retirement cabin. That dream, paid for by Crestview loyalty, evaporated in the stale air-conditioned office. Walking past my desk, I saw a photo of Sarah and me on our anniversary. I'd helped build this Charlotte office from a 3-man operation into a regional powerhouse. I wasn't just an employee, I was part of the foundation. Richard seemed to forget that you can't just remove a foundational stone without threatening the entire structure. He thought he was getting rid of a problem. He had no idea he just created a much, much bigger one. The drive home was a blur. The Charlotte skyline, a view I'd cherished for 2 decades, felt alien and hostile. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. It wasn't just anger. It was a profound, soul-deep sense of betrayal. The Facebook post. I replayed it in my mind. It was a shared article about a proposed federal tax policy. My comment was brief, professional even. I'd written, "From a wealth management perspective, this policy could disincentivize long-term investment and harm capital growth for retirees. Worth a serious debate." That was it. No insults. No partisan rage. It was the kind of analysis I gave to clients every single day. Who would have even shown it to Richard? My profile was private. Friends only. Then the name hit me like a physical blow. Mark Renshaw. A junior advisor, sharp and ambitious, who I'd personally mentored. He'd sent me a friend request a few months back. I'd accepted, thinking it was a team-building gesture. Mark had been sniffing around my biggest account for a year. The Henderson family, a portfolio I'd managed since the patriarch first started his company. Mark saw my comment not as an opinion, but as an opportunity, a neatly packaged excuse to get the old guard out of his way. I remembered the 2008 crash. Richard was a junior analyst then, sweating through his expensive shirts while the market bled out. I was the one on the phone until 2 a.m. night after night, reassuring panicked clients, holding the line, preventing a capital flight that would have crippled our branch. I saved millions for our clients and, by extension, for Crestview. I saved Richard's career before it had even started. And for that loyalty, I got a pink slip because of a 28-word comment on social media. I pulled into my driveway. Through the living room window, I could see Sarah watering her orchids. Her calm, graceful movements were a stark contrast to the tempest inside me. I walked in, and the smile on her face vanished the second she saw mine. I didn't have to say a word. "What happened?" she asked, her voice laced with dread. I told her everything. The meeting, Richard's empty words, the box I wouldn't be packing. She listened, her expression hardening from concern to steel. When I finished, she didn't cry, she didn't panic. She walked over, took my hand, and looked me straight in the eye. "David," she said, her voice firm, unwavering. "They can't do this. You built that place. This is not over." She was right. This wasn't just an injustice, it was an illegal one. North Carolina is an at-will employment state, but there are exceptions. Firing someone for expressing a political opinion on their own time? That felt different. That felt like a line had been crossed. The dream of our cabin in the mountains wasn't dead. It was just going to be funded by a different source. Crestview Financial was about to learn just how much a foundational stone is truly worth. The next morning, the shock had curdled into a cold, hard resolve. Sarah sat across from me at the kitchen table, a legal pad and pen placed deliberately between us. There was no grief in her eyes, only fire. "Okay," she said, her voice crisp. "Assumption 1, you were fired because of the Facebook post. Assumption 2, Richard didn't find it himself. Who showed him?" "It had to be Mark Renshaw," I said, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. "He's the only one in the office on my friends list who has the ambition and the lack of a soul to do it. He's been circling the Henderson account for months." "A hunch isn't evidence, David." She tapped the pen on the pad. "We need to know for sure. Is there anyone left at Crestview you can trust? Absolutely trust." One name came to mind. Greg. A senior portfolio manager like me, a man who measured his words and his loyalties with equal care. He was old school, just a few years from retirement, and had seen ambitious sharks like Mark come and go. We'd shared countless coffees over the years, complaining about the new guard's obsession with buzzwords over balance sheets. I met him at a small independent coffee shop miles from the uptown towers. He looked haggard, older than he had a week ago. "David, I'm sorry," he began, his voice low. "It's a disgrace what they did." "I appreciate that, Greg. I need to ask you something. And your answer stays between us, I swear on my life." I leaned in. "Was it Mark?" Greg's eyes darted towards the door, a flicker of fear crossing his face. He let out a long, slow breath. "It was him." But it wasn't just that he showed Richard the post. He shook his head, a look of disgust on his face. "He orchestrated the whole thing. I overheard him." My blood ran cold. "What did you hear?" "I was in the copy room. He was talking to that new kid, Peterson. Bragging." Greg's voice dropped to a near whisper. "He said he told Richard that your increasingly volatile political stances were a liability. He told Richard he'd heard whispers that the Henderson family was getting uncomfortable. A complete lie, David. You and I both know Bill Henderson wouldn't care if you voted for a Martian, as long as his portfolio was green." The betrayal was a physical thing, a weight pressing down on my chest. I had brought Mark onto the Henderson account. I'd introduced him to Bill at the club. I had personally vouched for him. He framed me. I said, the words hollow. "He did more than that," Greg continued, his own anger now showing. "He told Peterson he saw an opportunity to accelerate his career path by clearing out the dead wood." That's what he called you, David. Dead wood. Dead wood. "After 22 years. After saving the firm's skin in 2008. After mentoring the very snake who was now poisoning my name." The profound sense of injustice solidified into something much harder, much sharper. It was no longer just about a job or a cabin in the mountains. It was about my name, my legacy. He told Richard the Henderson account needed a younger, more dynamic hand. Greg finished, looking at me with deep pity. Richard bought it, or he wanted to. It was easier than having a backbone. I stared into my untouched coffee. The vague picture of betrayal was now a high-definition photograph. Every sickening detail in sharp focus. Mark hadn't just stumbled upon an opportunity. He'd crafted it, weaponized it, and aimed it right at my heart. He thought he'd removed a foundational stone. He was about to find out he'd just handed me a wrecking ball. I thanked Greg, assuring him his name would never come up. Sitting in my car, The Charlotte skyline now looked like a series of targets. I pulled out my phone and typed a new search into my phone's browser. Best wrongful termination lawyer Charlotte. The first result was a firm, Vance & Associates. The bio for the lead partner, Elena Vance, described her as a, quote, giant slayer. I booked a consultation for the following afternoon. When I got home, I laid everything out for Sarah. The lies, the betrayal, the term dead wood. She listened, her jaw set. The fire in her eyes from the day before had cooled into something far more dangerous, a glacial calm. Good, she said when I told her about the lawyer. This isn't about anger anymore, David. This is a business transaction. They took your career. We're going to take their money. Elena Vance's office was a world away from Crestview's old money mahogany. It was steel, glass, and stark white walls, overlooking the city from the 40th floor. She was younger than I expected, with an unnerving stillness that made you feel like she was hearing not just your words, but your intentions. We sat opposite her, a united front. I didn't ramble, I didn't vent. I presented the facts as if I were briefing a client on a hostile takeover. The 22 years of service, the 2008 crash, the mentorship of Mark Renshaw, the exact wording of the Facebook post. I recounted my conversation with Greg, protecting his identity, detailing how Mark had fabricated the story about the Henderson family's discomfort. I finished by explaining the value of that single account to the Charlotte branch. Elena listened without interruption, her fingers steepled. When I was done, a slow, predatory smile touched her lips. They're going to hide behind North Carolina's at-will employment laws, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. It's their first and weakest line of defense. They will say they can fire you for any reason or no reason at all. She leaned forward. But they can't fire you for a false reason. What you've described isn't just wrongful termination. It's textbook defamation. Mark Renshaw knowingly published a false statement to a third party, your boss, that caused you material harm. Crestview, in turn, acted on that defamatory statement without performing a shred of due diligence. They didn't call the Hendersons. They didn't question Mark's sudden insight. They were negligent. The word hung in the air. Negligent. It was the perfect description of Richard's spinelessness. They wanted a quick, clean amputation. Elena continued. They thought you'd be too old, too tired, too embarrassed to fight. They miscalculated. She looked directly at me. Mr. Miller, you have a reputation for being a steady hand. Is there any written proof of the Henderson family's satisfaction with your performance? Emails? Letters? Anything. I thought of the file I'd kept for 2 decades. Performance reviews, handwritten thank you notes from Bill Henderson, emails praising my guidance. I have 22 years of it, I said. Elena's smile widened. Excellent. Then our first move is simple. We don't send a letter to Crestview's HR department. We don't tip our hand to Mark. We get a sworn affidavit from Bill Henderson. We let their biggest client, their most important asset, testify against them. We let him become our wrecking ball. The plan was audacious. It was terrifying. And it was perfect. The old David Miller, the steady hand, would have hesitated. He would have worried about burning bridges, about causing a scene, but that David had been incinerated in Richard's office. The man who walked out of Elena's firm was someone new, someone forged in betrayal and focused on a single objective. Getting a meeting with Bill Henderson wasn't a matter of going through official channels. I had his personal cell number, a privilege reserved for a handful of people. I'd used it exactly 3 times in 15 years, always for market-moving emergencies. This, I decided, qualified. I sat in my home office, the same room where I'd taken late-night calls to calm Bill during the '08 crisis. Sarah stood in the doorway, a silent pillar of support. I took a deep breath, steadied my hand, and pressed dial. He answered on the second ring, his voice a familiar, gravelly bark. "Miller. What's the crisis?" "No crisis, Bill. At least, not with the market," I said, my voice even, professional. "I need 15 minutes of your time. It's a personal matter of some urgency." A pause. "Bill Henderson didn't do personal matters during trading hours. I heard Crestview let you go," he said, the statement flat, unreadable. "Richard's office called yesterday. That punk kid, Renshaw, is my new point of contact. Didn't like the sound of him." My heart hammered against my ribs. So they had already made their move. "That's actually what I need to talk to you about, Bill. It's important." Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "My office. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Don't be late." The line went dead. Sarah let out a breath she'd been holding. "He's listening." "For now," I said, but it was a start. The next morning, I put on my best suit, not for a job interview, but for battle. The Henderson Industries headquarters occupied the top 5 floors of one of Charlotte's newest skyscrapers, a monument of glass and steel that made the Crestview building look dated. I was escorted to the top floor, to Bill's corner office. The view was panoramic, godlike. He didn't get up, just gestured to a leather chair opposite his massive desk. "All right, David," he said, leaning back. "You've got 15 minutes. Talk." I laid it out just as I had for Elena. No emotion, just the cold, hard facts. The 22 years of service, the Facebook post, the meeting with Richard, and then the core of it, Mark Renshaw's lie. "I was told my employment was terminated, in part because you and your family had become uncomfortable with my management of your account, that you felt you needed a younger, more dynamic hand." Bill's expression didn't change, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. He stared at me, his eyes like chips of granite. "He said that? He said Price was uncomfortable?" Those were the words relayed to me, yes. He told my boss he was hearing whispers to that effect. Bill Henderson slowly placed his hands flat on his desk. He wasn't a man given to theatrics, which made his quiet fury all the more terrifying. He looked past me, out at the city he dominated. "Mark Renshaw, the kid you brought to the club Christmas party. Skinny tie, too much gel in his hair. The one I was mentoring to eventually help with your portfolio, yes." "And he used my name," Bill said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing rumble, "to get you fired." It wasn't a question. "It appears so." He turned his gaze back to me. "This isn't about your job, is it, David? You're not here asking me to get it back for you." "No, Bill, I'm not. My time at Crestview is over. This is about the truth. My lawyer is filing a suit for wrongful termination and defamation. The defamation claim hinges on the fact that Mark knowingly told a lie that caused me material harm. A lie that involved you." I slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was the draft affidavit Elena had prepared. Simple, direct, stating that he had never expressed any dissatisfaction with my work, had never requested a new advisor, and that any statement to the contrary was a complete fabrication. Bill picked it up. He read it in less than 10 seconds. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of the man I'd talked off a ledge in 2008. "They called you Dead Wood, didn't they? Or something like it. I know how these little sharks operate." The accuracy of his guess stunned me. I just nodded. He let out a short, harsh laugh devoid of any humor. "In 2008, when the world was ending, you called me at 10 p.m. You told me to hold the line that panic was a poison. You saved me millions, David, my family's legacy. And that firm? You saved their entire Charlotte operation from a capital flight that would have sunk them." He tapped the affidavit on his desk. "They didn't just fire a loyal employee. They slandered me to do it. They used my name as a weapon against the man who protected my assets. It's a profound sign of disrespect." He swiveled his chair, picked up his phone, and buzzed his assistant. "Linda, get my personal attorney on the line, and find a notary. I need one in my office in the next 10 minutes. He hung up and looked at me, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. An affidavit? David, that's the appetizer. I'll give you the sworn statement. But when this goes to court, I'm testifying. I will sit in that witness box, and I will personally and very publicly tell a judge what I think of Crestview Financial's integrity. He stood up and finally extended a hand. They made 2 mistakes. They fired the wrong man, and they lied about the right one. As I left his office, affidavit signed and notarized, my phone buzzed. It was Elena. Status update? I looked out the window of the elevator, down at the Crestview building far below. It looked smaller now, more fragile. The wrecking ball is in place, I said. And it's much bigger than we thought. The lawsuit wasn't a quiet letter, it was a thunderclap. Elena filed it electronically, and the shockwave hit Crestview's executive floor within the hour. Their response came 2 days later via a crisp, condescending letter from their high-priced corporate law firm. They cited North Carolina's at-will status, called my claims baseless and opportunistic, and offered a nuisance settlement of 4 weeks, severance. It was an insult wrapped in legalese. They're arrogant, Elena said over the phone, her voice laced with amusement. They think you're a 54-year-old man who will be scared off by a big letterhead. They haven't accounted for Bill Henderson. They haven't accounted for us. Her strategy was to bypass months of procedural nonsense and move directly to the heart of the matter, depositions. She wanted Mark and Richard under oath, on camera, before their lawyers had time to fully construct a coordinated defense. The deposition room was a sterile, soulless box in a downtown law firm. Crestview's 2 lawyers sat on one side of a long conference table, flanking a visibly nervous Mark Renshaw. I sat beside Elena, instructed to remain silent, a ghost at their feast. Mark started with a practiced confidence, a smugness that set my teeth on edge. He answered questions about his role, his ambitions, his respect for me as a mentor. It was all a polished performance. Then, Elena leaned forward, her friendly demeanor vanishing. Mr. Renshaw, let's talk about the Henderson account. In the days leading up to Mr. Miller's termination, did you have a conversation with Richard Powell about this account? I may have, Mark said, adjusting his tie. We discuss major clients regularly. And in that conversation, did you tell Mr. Powell that the Henderson family had expressed discomfort with Mr. Miller's performance? Crestview's lead lawyer cleared his throat, but Mark waved him off, confident. I relayed some concerns I had been hearing. It was my fiduciary duty. Concerns you had been hearing? Elena's voice was sharp as glass. From whom exactly? Did you hear them from Bill Henderson himself? Not directly, no. It was more industry chatter. Industry chatter, Elena repeated, letting the flimsy excuse hang in the air. She slid a document across the table. This is a sworn affidavit from William Henderson, signed and notarized. In it, he states he has never, to anyone, expressed any dissatisfaction with Mr. Miller. In fact, he calls David's performance exemplary. He further states that any claim to the contrary is, and I quote, a malicious fabrication. Would you care to revise your testimony about this industry chatter, Mr. Renshaw? The color drained from Mark's face. He stared at Henderson's signature on the paper as if it were a scorpion. He stammered, his eyes darting to his lawyers, who now looked deeply uneasy. I may have misinterpreted. Elena wasn't done. She let the silence stretch, a form of torture in itself. Mr. Renshaw, I have a sworn statement from another Crestview employee who overheard you in the copy room. This employee heard you bragging that you were going to clear out the dead wood, to accelerate your career path. Is that your term for a man who mentored you for years, Mr. Renshaw? Dead wood? Mark looked like he'd been physically struck. His confident facade shattered, revealing the panicked, grasping child underneath. He could deny it, but the seed was planted. The lie was exposed. The rest of his deposition was a pathetic mess of "I don't recall" and nervous glances at his lawyers. Next was Richard. He walked in with the weary air of a man who just wanted this to be over. He clung to the company line, "At will employment." Elena let him repeat it 3 times. Then she moved in. "Mr. Powell, you terminated a 22-year veteran of your firm, a man you admit had a stellar record, based on 2 pieces of information: a Facebook post you didn't see yourself, and a second-hand rumor from a junior advisor. I made a judgment call based on the information I had to protect the firm," Richard said stiffly. "And what was that information regarding the Henderson account?" "That the client was uncomfortable and looking for a change. A multi-million-dollar account, one of the cornerstones of your branch," Elena said, her voice dangerously quiet. "And this career-ending information came from Mr. Renshaw, the very man who stood to inherit that account. Is that correct?" "Yes." Elena paused, holding his gaze. "Mr. Powell, in the face of this extraordinary claim, did you at any point perform the most basic act of due diligence? Did you pick up the telephone and call your client, Bill Henderson, to verify it?" The room was utterly silent. Richard's jaw worked, but no sound came out. His lawyers stared at the table. He knew, we all knew, this was the kill shot. "No," he finally whispered, the word barely audible. "I did not." Elena leaned back in her chair, her work done. She didn't need to say another word. Richard hadn't just been negligent. The single word hung in the air, an epitaph for Richard's career. The deposition was over. Crestview's lawyers didn't even try to redirect. They just gathered their papers with the grim finality of undertakers, avoiding eye contact. Richard sat slumped in his chair, a hollowed-out shell of the executive he was that morning. Mark Renshaw looked physically ill. His ambition curdled into pure terror. He knew he was radioactive. No one would trust him again. Elena and I walked out without a word. We didn't need to. In the sterile hallway, under the fluorescent lights, the war was already won. The legal fight was just a formality now, the tidying up after a demolition. 2 days later, the call came. I was in the kitchen with Sarah, the morning sun streaming in. I put Elena on speakerphone. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the triumph underneath. "They folded, David, completely." She explained that Crestview's lawyers had called her directly. There was no more posturing, no more blustering about at-will employment. Their only goal now was containment. They wanted to avoid a public trial at all costs, especially one featuring Bill Henderson as the star witness for the prosecution. "They're terrified," Elena said. "Not just of the damages, but of the discovery process. They don't want me digging through their emails. They don't want Henderson telling the Charlotte business community how they treat their loyal people." The offer was staggering. It wasn't just a settlement. It was an unconditional surrender. A sum that covered my lost earnings for the next decade, plus significant punitive damages for defamation. It included a non-disclosure agreement, of course, but also a public letter of retraction and apology to be provided to anyone I designated for the misunderstanding surrounding my departure. It was everything. I looked at Sarah. The steel in her eyes melted, replaced by a profound, shimmering relief. She reached across the table and took my hand, her grip tight. The money was life-changing, yes. It was the cabin in the mountains, it was security, it was freedom. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was the silence in that deposition room. It was the look of dawning horror on Mark Renshaw's face. It was Richard Powell being forced to admit, under oath, that his cowardice and negligence had destroyed a man's career. They had tried to erase 22 years of my life, to label me as dead wood. Now, they were paying a fortune to bury their own toxic incompetence. They weren't settling with an ex-employee. They were paying protection money to stop me from burning their reputation to this suck. Be honest, if you got fired over a social media post, Would you have the guts to sue, or would you just walk away and find a new job? I want to know what you would have done.